All right. Welcome, everybody. We're going to wait a few more minutes, and hopefully we have a few more people joining us before we get started. But you can give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear us okay. We have muted everybody just for the presentation portion of today's program, and then we'll have plenty of time for people to raise their hand and ask questions afterwards. So we'll just wait 1 or 2 more minutes and then we'll get going. All right, I'm going to get started with a couple quick intro slides just to start off today. So my name is Bryn. I'm with the Lincoln Land Conservation Trust. So happy to be here today. This was really organized by the Lincoln Tree Preservation Study Group with collaboration from the Lincoln Conservation Department. And we're excited to have Mathew Cahill with us today. As I mentioned just a moment ago, we have muted everybody just for the presentation portion of this program, and then we'll have time for people to unmute, raise their hand, and ask questions at the end. And feel free to put questions in the chat throughout, and we'll try and get to those too. Just a few quick land trust programs that are upcoming. We're really excited. We've got a conservation work day this Friday at 1 p.m. We've got a couple pollinator garden open houses in June and July. We have a family watershed walk at Mount Misery in late June. So if anyone has kids or grandkids, really encourage you to sign up for that. And we do have a site visit for our upcoming conservation project, which I'll talk about very briefly in a moment. And that is on June 18th in the evening. And if you aren't on our email list, you can subscribe. Our website is lincolnconservation.org, and you can find all of our upcoming programs, lots of great information. So then I just wanted to briefly take a moment, since we're so close to the special town meeting, I'd be remiss not to mention the Land Trust is helping pull together with Rural Land Foundation one of our biggest conservation projects that we've ever done, which is called the Nature Link. And our goal is to conserve about 77 acres of forested upland and wetland habitat in Northeast Lincoln. And this is a project combined with building a small neighborhood near Route 2 and creating a new public trail about 1.5 miles that runs the whole length of the property and is going to connect essentially Trapello Road almost all the way up to Route 2. So this is a really great conservation project. It's going to be voted on at town meeting on June 25th. So I encourage everyone who supports saving trees. We can save 77 acres of trees by attending that meeting and voting yes. So that's my only pitch. The rest of the program won't be about that. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me separately, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Ryan Brown of the Town Conservation Department.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Brown. I am the land manager for the Town of Lincoln's Conservation Department. Just to give you kind of like an overview of what the Conservation Department, there are kind of 4 main goals that the Conservation Department pursues. Chiefly, we support the Conservation Commission in administering the Wetland Protection Act and local wetlands bylaws. We provide environmental outreach and education to the community. We also advise and collaborate with town departments, local conservation groups, and other regional partners. And finally, we do a lot of land protection too, in terms of managing our deeded parcels of land and acting on parts of the town's open space plan. And my duties as the town's land manager for the conservation department, um, in collaboration with land stewardship staff from LLCT. We manage about 2,000 acres of conservation land. That's kind of split between deeded parcels and conservation restrictions. Across that landscape, we have about 80 miles of trails. So it keeps us relatively busy. We do a lot of different stewardship activities, from maintaining trails, clearing blowdowns, managing vegetation along these corridors, to also doing a little more robust projects. Like, we also maintain a lot of our parking lots. We use equipment. We have biodiversity fields that we mow annually. The land trust does a lot with pollinator stewardship. Um, and also we do a lot of invasive management across these parcels too. So that's just kind of the 100-mile overview of the conservation department. So I'm going to kick it over to Deborah.
Thanks, thanks, Ryan, and thanks also to you, Bryn. We really appreciate what the Conservation Department and the LLCT are doing, and also doing in co-hosting this event with us. And Bryn, especially, thank you for all the logistical help that you're giving us to make this webinar happen. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with me, I am Deb Howe. I'm a registered landscape architect and an ISA certified arborist. I've lived in the Metro Boston area since 1983 and in Lincoln since 2012. And I'm one of 4 founding members of the Lincoln Tree Preservation Study Group, a band of residents interested in what we call Lincoln's community forest, which is all the trees, public and private, with whom we share this land. The TPSG's other members are Susan Hall Magatt, Connie Olston, and Barbara Peskin. And you may have become aware of us at last December's State of the Town meeting, when we first shared a number of resources on tree preservation in other towns and distributed a survey to find out how Lincoln residents knew and thought about trees. We also had a little tree ID quiz that some of you took using twigs and foliage from local trees, which was kind of a fun 3D exercise. And what we learned at the SOTT has helped shape our efforts since then. And so at a high level, our efforts fall into 3 buckets, and those buckets are research, sharing, and collaboration. And I'm going to put up a slide showing our priorities. Let's see if I can get this up. Can you see this? Just nod if you can.
We can see your
You
folder.
can also see my folder. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me get out of that. Oh. Hold on, I'm going to stop that share. I'm going to do this again.
In the meantime, we had a question from Vicky about how one can join your group. Could they just email you?
We actually, boy, you're stumped. You got to stump her
A tough one.
right off the bat. Email us and we'll talk. We're still keeping our group tiny because we're trying to figure out how best to position what we're doing. And we're still in the, as I said, we've got these 3 buckets: research, sharing, and collaboration. And this webinar is in the sharing mode. Collaboration, we've heard interest from the Lincoln Garden Club and from Lincoln Common Ground in figuring out how we can collaborate with them. So we are very interested in working with other people. We just haven't figured out how to do it yet. So send us an email. But first, just be here in our webinar with us. So I'm going to go through. I'm going to flip back, Vicky, from your question to my script, because now I have this slide up. And can you see this?
Not yet.
Oh,
do you want to try resharing?
Sorry. All right, how is this?
Great.
Okay. So our priorities are to learn about tree and forest protection efforts underway by neighboring towns, to find local and regional resources from which to gather information, tips, and tools, to share our findings with interested parties to raise awareness of opportunities and challenges facing trees, to stay attuned to Lincoln and local town efforts that affect trees and that inform our learning and actions. And then, as I was mentioning earlier, to align with other local organizations to support or complement our common goals. And so, in keeping with the priority of sharing our findings, in March, the LLCT and Lincoln Conservation Department co-sponsored with us an excellent talk by the Charles River Watershed Association on regional tree cover in the Charles River watershed. And Lincoln, for those of you not aware of this, Lincoln is in the Charles River watershed. And I think a number of attendees to today's webinar also attended that one. So this is this webinar we're hoping is going to be one of 4 for 2025. And if we're successful with these, then we'll continue because there's a ton of information and a ton for us to learn, a ton for us to share. So now I need to introduce our actual guest, which is not me, and that is Matt Cahill from the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. And he's with the Urban and Community Forestry Program with the DCR. And the DCR is one of the excellent resources available to the Commonwealth. And it's one that we've been exploring with Matt and with Julie Coop, a colleague of his, and we're delighted to have him share information with us. So I'm going to hand the screen over to you, Matt, and hear you talk about the DCR's tree and forestry preservation tools and resources, how the community forest functions and how we can preserve its ecosystem and human benefits, and then Matt is going to outline how a legacy tree program, the DCR's legacy tree program, works and how Lincoln might contribute to and maybe even develop one of its own. So Matt, thank you so much for doing this talk for us today, and here you go.
Great. Thank you so much. Is my screen up and running?
Looks good.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, happy to be here. Again, Mathew Cahill. My title is a Community Action Forester. I'm an urban forester. Our bureau has a whole bunch of different parts to it. Let's see. Who we are. Hopefully you know about DCR already, but we have been told that we do a not great job about talking about ourselves. So we always take an opportunity to talk about DCR, talk about the agency, because we do a lot. There's a whole bunch of different agencies, departments within the Commonwealth, and often we're called the Department of Everything Else. They don't know what to do with it. It ends up at DCR. But our mission is to protect, promote, and enhance our Commonwealth of natural, cultural, and recreational resources for the well-being of all. And yes, this is a picture here at Walden Pond. We have beaches, we have lakefront, we have properties out by the ocean, we've got state forests, skating rinks, recreational centers, just many different pieces of the state. There was the Metropolitan District Commission back in the day, if you guys remember the old MDC. Then out west was the DEM, Department of Environmental Management, which merged and became DCR. So all those duties and responsibilities are still with us. So we do several different things and have a lot of different departments. Where I am housed, essentially, is in the Bureau of Forestry. We're actually called the Bureau of Fire Control and Forestry. They, even last year, around Salem, all these different areas, wildfires pop up. DCR helps manage those wildland fires and provides assistance to cities and towns. And the Bureau does a whole bunch of different stuff. We have actual foresters who are out in the woods. We have state land management. We work with private landowners to manage forest cutting plans. We have a wood markets and utilization program. If you've seen in the news or been out at UMass Amherst, you see new construction methods, buildings going up that have timber structures instead of steel structures, multi-floor buildings going up, cross-laminated timbers, a lot of really interesting and productive ways to use our local forests and to store carbon. So we have a climate 2050 goal to be carbon neutral here in the Commonwealth, and locally sourcing what we can is a part of that. Also, forest health is another part of our bureau. So as we go through this talk today, we'll be talking about our trees, and mostly our native trees, but then you'll start to learn more about non-native trees, exotic trees, invasive trees, and pests that have been coming over and ramping up over the last few decades. Out in Worcester, the Department of Conservation and Recreation had to deal with the Asian longhorn beetle. That was a joint program with the Forest Service, USDA, to eradicate the Asian longhorn beetle. Luckily, that's been successful, whereas a pest like the emerald ash borer that's come through and killed all the ash trees, we don't have a good control for that. So back in my shop, urban and community, we're part of that whole big forestry picture. And there's basically two of us that you've heard of. There's Julie Coop and myself that run the urban forestry program, and we help cities and towns and nonprofits with protecting, growing, and managing their urban trees. We have grants programs, technical assistance. We do talks like we're doing today, a variety of programs. So I'm going to talk about this now, and you can go check it out later, but mass.gov, that's where basically everything I'm going to talk about today that you will find on mass.gov. You can type in the Urban and Community Forestry Program. I'll take you to our page, and we've got a lot of stuff listed there. The Legacy Tree Program that I'm going to talk about today is actually under the Bureau of Forestry Program, but you can, again, just search that and it'll take you right there. Excuse me. So these are some of our links. The 50/50 matching grants, we call them Urban Challenge grants. Terrific resource. Typically, we ask for a notice of intent around October, and the deadline for the grants is usually annually around November. So it's 50/50 because it's a cost share grant. Cities and towns will provide half the funds, and we'll provide half the funds. And we've had some really terrific projects. There's a whole variety of things that are eligible for funding, and you can find that on the website and in the information packets that are there. I write and publish a newsletter. It's quarterly. It's called the Citizen Forester Newsletter. You can find that on our website. You can find the back issues there. A lot of great urban forestry related topics. Tree protection has been written about. Legacy Tree Program has been written about. So you can find a lot of information out there. You can sign up and shoot me an email. We'll get you on the list, and that will go right to your inbox. A really big program that we have that we're very proud of is the Green and Gateway Cities program. This is our actual boots on the ground tree planting program, where we, the state, are taking funds and putting it into what we call the 26 gateway cities. So those are sort of medium-sized post-industrial cities and towns, or just cities across the Commonwealth. And we can provide trees in environmental justice neighborhoods planted by DCR crews, which we hire for the most part locally from the communities. People who get trained up in the green industry, and they plant trees that grow up and shade homes and lower energy costs and cool our cities. Also, Tree City USA, we always want to talk about that. That's a national program, but I do facilitate this program here in the state of Massachusetts. You can sign up. There's 4 criteria. You can check that out on the Arbor Day Foundation website. They're the group that runs the Tree City program. You can see if you meet those criteria. You can, again, give me a call or shoot me an email if you want more information on that. And next week, I was just telling some folks earlier, we actually have the awards ceremony. So it's a calendar year sort of time frame that the accomplishments happen. And then the following summer, we basically throw a big party and invite everybody. So we'll be doing that next week in Malden, and have all of our tree cities. And it's not just cities, it's campuses, higher education areas. They have K through 12 now. and for the utility companies as well, called the Tree Line Program. So a lot of good ways to help your community aspire to better urban forestry management. And then we have an Arbor Day poster contest with students. It was 5th grade. Now we open up to 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. So you can talk to your local schools and let them know that we have a poster contest. And kids develop just incredible artwork. We create a calendar out of it and make that available at the end of the year. And that's been a big success as well. Again, you can go to our link here, go to our website. A lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about today, we have, so we try to talk about not reinventing the wheel, but if you're interested in those, community bylaws or ordinance that we're going to talk about today, we've tried to compile as many of those as we can and make them available on our website. So those are there. I'm going to talk a lot about Chapter 87. So that's the Mass General Law. So that state law, there's some information there on the website about the laws that govern and protect public trees. We wholeheartedly endorse tree boards and committees. So we definitely want each community as much as possible to have a tree board or a tree committee that works with your town, with your tree warden. There's the person legally responsible for your trees in a city and town. You may not have an actual tree warden. It may be someone else wearing the hat of a tree warden, your DPW director, someone along those lines. But that's where the legal buck stops, so to speak, when it comes to trees. They're the one responsible by state law. Management plans, ordinances we talked about, zoning, subdivision, regulations, a lot of this stuff we try to compile and put on this site. So go ahead and take a look there later on. Yeah, and it's mass.gov, so it may be a little hard to search around, but that's where you're going to go to look for stuff. So now with that out of the way, I can talk a little bit more about trees and about urban forestry in particular. And we hear that here in Lincoln, we're talking about community forest. And that's what we try and say too. We say urban and community forests. Because sometimes we'll go out to a community like you see on the left-hand side of the screen here, and they say, why are you telling me about trees? We've got trees. We've got trees everywhere. We want to make sure that people know that it's where people and trees intersect. So it could be rural, it could be suburban, it could be urban. That's what we talk about when we talk about urban and community forestry, that intersection between trees and people. And that it's not just about trees. It really, it's the cornerstone of the entire ecosystem, of everything that you're trying to accomplish. It's great to see Conservation Commission represented here as well. We talk a lot about how much it costs to provide clean water to people, and the easiest solution is just to, leave some forest intact. And it's amazing what it can do to filter and clean and do all the great things it's supposed to be doing. Not just good for people, good for animals. This is a funny story. That picture I took in Lawrence, and that's the Spigot River Greenway where we were planting trees and, having a great time, putting trees in the ground. And we saw that a tree had been what looked like vandalized. And we said, oh, darn, it's too bad that someone would come out here and break this tree. On closer inspection, it was that beaver. There were beavers returning to the Spigot River, and they were coming out and gnawing on our little trees. Needless to say, we put fences around them, but it's great what reforestation can do and how quickly nature can rebound and come back when you start caring for them. And in caring for these places, we're caring for ourselves. It's clean air, clean water. It's pride in our cities and towns, pride in our neighborhood. I really enjoy our tree planting program. We're putting people to work. You're out there, you're getting dirty, and it's hands-on, and you really feel that sense of accomplishment, especially now that we've been running this program for over 10 years. So we can go back to these communities and see this tree. It looks like a small tree in this picture here. It's now a large tree. It's providing shade. You stand under it as you're talking to people about it, and you're cool. You feel good, and it's doing what you want it to do. We've done this all throughout the Commonwealth, not just the gateway cities. Again, the urban forestry program, we work with all 351 cities and towns. We put trees in all over the place. We provide funding and opportunities, and it's great to see what people do given a chance. So again, we just promote that we're here as a resource, and we can help. The sky's the limit for what you come up with. Think big, and we'll be there to try and help you achieve your goals. So a little bit about our state. I think this information may be slightly dated, but about 62% forest cover. That's the green here. The red is the impervious. So obviously Boston, and as you radiate out from there, you see Worcester, you see Springfield, and then you see a lot of the forest that's in Western Mass, but it's continuing to grow. Not a lot of this is protected, right? In the sense of that the state owns it, has it, so it won't be developed. Luckily, we in Massachusetts have a lot of land trusts, so it's great to see the land trusts as well. On the private side, kind of moving forward that mission, protecting, preserving land, working to sort of counterbalance development. And there's always going to be growth, but what we try to promote is smart growth. So it's good to see, cities, towns creating ordinances and bylaws where you have, more control over the growth of your community. If you don't want it to be continuous sprawl, there's a lot of other ways to go about that, and to ensure that trees are protected as part of your development plans, which are very important. And I also want to stress redevelopment. So we have vacant buildings that sometimes are just sitting there and looking for a new lease on life, but that vacant land is not vacant, right? It's providing all those services that we just talked about. So it's great to see that you're going to be voting on a piece of land in your town coming up at your next town meeting. Highly encourage that as well. The best way to protect trees is to not cut them down in the first place. We do a lot of replanting. It's a lot of urban areas. It's a lot of trying to break up the impervious and create areas for trees again so they can be established. But the absolute best way is to just protect the trees that you have in the first place. We could go on and on all day about the benefits of trees. You probably have this all memorized. You've heard this a million times, but there's always information out there if you want a little one-pager and send it around to folks or whatever. There's a great online tool called iTree, if you haven't heard about it. That's from the U.S. Forest Service. You can Google that, iTree tools will come up. And it's very powerful. There's a bunch of different programs, but there are a few more simple. The easiest one's called MyTree. And it will actually, when you put in the information on that tree, it'll generate like what looks like a nutrition label. But instead of having, amounts of protein, it'll tell you, how much carbon was removed by this tree, how much stormwater runoff is being prevented by this tree. It's a great program. It's been around for a long time, vetted by peer-reviewed research and run by the Forest Service. So take a look at that as well, especially if you want to learn more something that communicates that value in terms of dollars, because we all know that's what the decision makers want to see ultimately is what are the number of dollars being saved, and that program will allow you to do that. So there's two sides of it for what you can do. There's replacement and protection. So we really want to stress protection, and it's great to see the committee here today, thinking about tree protection, getting their minds around tree protection, how that can work in a town and what it can look like. So really triggered through a bylaw or an ordinance, triggered through planning board, permitting. Those are the ways to actually get it into the legal ramifications so that okay, the site plan comes in, the mature trees are identified, and then we're going to put, like you see in this picture, a tree protection zone. Sometimes you'll just see a couple 2x4s strapped up against the trunk of the tree and say, okay, it's protected, But really what's going on underneath, if you're thinking about the tree biology, that root zone that comes down, it doesn't go straight down, it doesn't go straight into the ground. It goes down and then branches out underneath the ground. So you have an area around the tree, if you follow sort of the ends of the tree where the leaves are down on the ground, they call that a drip line, like water would drip down off the tree. And that's essentially your root zone, your critical root zone. If you start driving over it with construction devices, bulldozers, backhoes, whatever, you're going to kill those roots. You're going to break the roots, suffocate the roots, and the trees ultimately die. In my town, everyone was very excited. We had this new library going in. They were like, oh, and we're going to save these trees. But then they didn't put up any protection zones, and the equipment went through. And then after the library project was completed, they came back and cut out all the mature trees because they had died. So again, this is all preventable. It's very easy. You can put up fencing. You can just have someone there who's on site making sure that the, stuff isn't getting knocked over. It's actually very easy to protect trees. It just has to happen. You can't just say, oh, well, we can park here, we can load our stuff here. It's not going to work. So replacing trees that are lost is another big part of it. Right tree, right place is what we stress. You can find more information about that online, but essentially the biggest thing in the urban and community area is utilities. So you have above ground utilities and you have underground utilities. So there's a lot of stuff you probably wouldn't see that you have to take into account. You call DigSafe, they'll come out and mark it out, but then you can figure out where a tree can and can't go. So sometimes people will look at a street and be like, I can't believe there's no trees on this street. What's the city doing? This doesn't make any sense. Well, it could be there's a gas line running down that entire sidewalk, so there's always a little bit more to the story, but once you start thinking about the concept of right tree, right place, making sure that you're not planting trees that are going to interfere with utilities or with your infrastructure, that's the best way to do it. You'll see trees from 50 years ago and the sidewalks pushed up because they didn't allow for mature growth of that tree. They just said, okay, we've got a 3x3 cutout here in the sidewalk, that's fine. Well, now your tree's 3 feet across and 80 feet tall, so that was not really the right tree, right place. Future considerations are very important to take into account during the planning process. Speaking of big trees from a long ago, that sort of takes us to our legacy program, and that has bounced around a bit. I'll just say right off the bat, I think I might have some slides on it, but the overall champion tree program was developed in the 40s by American Forest. But obviously people's affinities for large trees go much further back than that. Just a symbolic place, somewhere you can meet, someone, oh yeah, go down the dirt road and we'll meet up by the old tree. And it just was a part of our culture. You look at deeds from the 1700s, they're laying out property lines. It's typically go down to the oak and take a left and follow that to the maple. They used them as waypoints and as places where they could use as boundaries. In Massachusetts, we have a document here from 1892. That was our first sort of, from the Massachusetts Horticultural Society, a list of large, old, and interesting trees. It was a very neat document. I've got a copy in my office, and you sort of see that first idea of, hey, there are a lot of old, interesting trees. Why don't we start a list and go around and take a look at them? So that idea has been around. It was followed up in 1919. They have a Historic Trees of Massachusetts. There's about 200 pages of there's an old elm on the common. If you've been to the common recently, there's a lot of old trees. There's a couple old elms there that have been around for a long time. And there's historic context too, especially here in New England, in Massachusetts, the birthplace of our nation, the places that they gathered to talk about revolution and starting a new country. They were focused around trees. So our program, being not just champion trees, which will be the largest trees, but like what's a legacy tree? What's a tree that's leaving a legacy? And for us, it's trying to formally recognize, obviously largest trees for the species, trees with some sort of historic background to it, or unique botanical significance, or some other interesting story. This is a Japanese scholar tree on Boston Common. It's one that we've measured recently. So big, that's pretty self-explanatory. That's a big tree. We go out with our foresters when we can. I guess I have to say the disclaimer right now that we don't really, this program is not independently funded. It doesn't really have staff or commitment to it. It's just, it lives here at DCR. It used to be in forest health and now it's urban forestry. So as our foresters are out doing their normal jobs, we'll send them around to do measurements. So mostly right now during the spring and fall, we're planting trees. So measurements will typically happen either in the summer or for each species that we have. And then we collect the ones that are sort of close, we say within about 25 percentage points. because unfortunately trees don't last forever, and we do get a lot of storms and nor'easters. And so a tree that's a champion one year may have fallen over the next year. So we try and get back and take a look at those. And trees on the list are essentially required to be every 10 years remeasured. So even if we don't get to it right away, they'll eventually sort of be remeasured and the list keeps changing. If you're interested in the way that it's measured, so that's circumference, height, and then average crown spread, but that's reduced. It's only about 25% of the points, because you can have these really large trees and their branches break and they just kind of circumference and a bit of crown spread, and that'll equal your total champion points. And that's the national formula. So I did talk about American Forest. It's an organization that's been around for a while, and forwarding, well, they promote, good forestry. They promote large trees. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, they felt like they just couldn't manage the program anymore, so they were going to give up on the National Register of Champion Trees. Fortunately, University of Tennessee stepped in, and within this last year, they have taken over the National Champion Tree Program. Very, very good website if you want to check this one out, nationalchampiontree.org. They, just like we here at the state, spent a long time these last couple of years taking all the paper records and turning them into digital records. So they've got a lot of their champion trees online. We still have to we may have a white pine out in Western Mass that's made it to the national list. We have to go out and check that and measure it. Like I said, it takes us a while to get this work done, but we've been converting all of our records digitally and trying to get it online. We don't have a map per se available yet, but we do have the lists of trees available on our website. You can look at the Excel sheet, it lists the tree and the city, where it's located, if it's on public land, so you can go check it out. Some of these trees are on private land and the people don't want the address made public, so sometimes you just won't be able to see that tree. Historic trees, that's pretty easy. Someone important planted a tree, or the Battle of Revolution was fought under this tree. Here's one not too far away in Worcester. Teddy Roosevelt planted. Here he is with the tree, and that's what it looks like today. So it's kind of fun to go out and find these trees of historic significance, and have that little connection with the past, and you think about the history that the tree's seen and the changes that the trees have seen. Unique, so there's a botanical interest, and just like this tree is the only one in the exact geometric center of Massachusetts in Rutland. So you've got a tree along those lines. Unique historic, so fruit trees, a lot of fruit tree propagation happened here. Again, New England. This was a Baldwin apple tree, which fell down, looks like in 1815 here. But so, you start hearing about these historic and heirloom apples, pears, these other varieties. And those were created here. So, a tree can not be there anymore, but there could be a site of that aren't alive, but have been recorded because they were historically significant or unique. If you've been around Dorchester, you've seen a gigantic bronze pear. That's the clap pear in Dorchester. So again, a lot of history for some of these areas and neighborhoods centered around trees. People often ask, does that mean now my tree is protected? Unfortunately, no. This is a for fun program. It doesn't provide any legal protections to your trees. Chapter 87, as we talked about earlier in Mass General Law, provides the framework around which public trees have protections through the process enacted by your tree warden, through public hearings. That's how public trees are regulated. So unfortunately, trees come and go. They have stories to tell. It's fun to tell those stories. But through this program, there's no special protections given. And it's just, again, fun to think about. We talk to historical societies and they have these kind of old pictures, and it's good to go back and look. We have a virtual tour now too. If you want to go to our website, we try to match up some of the older pictures with newer pictures of the trees and take you around the state on a virtual tour. But just how people gravitate to these trees. It starts, they said, that trip of imagination, a lifelong journey of exploration. So you can join us. You can join the legacy. You can submit. It's all online now, so you fill out an online application. Let's see, this is essentially what it looks like on my end. I don't have this available, but this is the web app. We put it all into our geographic information system. We track where the trees are. We can filter. We can see which ones need to be checked by our foresters. We give them a map. We say, go out, check out this area. And if you click on something, it'll tell you that, the measurements that they've taken: circumference, average spread, height, what's your total points. So this black birch has 248 points, which is pretty big. So this is what the form looks like. So you can go ahead and get online, fill out the form. Here's the guide. Again, it's mass.gov, legacy tree, online nomination. That'll go in, and hopefully we'll get you into our system. Get out there when we can. Take some measurements and get you part of the legacy tree program. Here's my information. Contact, email's best. You can check out our website, sign up for our citizen forester. And I think that's my time, and that's about it in a nutshell.
Matt, thank you so much. This is really interesting. I have a bunch of questions I was scribbling down. And we know that DCR has been really instrumental in tree preservation throughout Massachusetts. And so we're looking at leveraging some of your ideas and resources here in Lincoln. So we're going to ask questions. I need to start with one question for you, Matt, and then we're going to open it up to everybody online. And so when we ask questions, I'm going to invite you to raise your virtual hand, and you can do that by just going down to the bottom navigation bar on your screen, and there's hit the reactions icon, and there's a little thing that says raise your hand. Hit that button and a little hand will go up in the window. I have to tell you this because I am terrible at doing that when it comes to town meetings. So you can also put your question in the chat window, and Connie and Susan will be monitoring the chat. So we'll do a couple of questions from raised hands, and then we'll do a chat question and bounce back and forth. I'm just going to ask Matt, because I am a nuts and bolts person. How do you measure the height of a tree if you're going for champion or legacy tree status?
Well, the old way is to use a stick, and then you use geometry and you do a little bit of math and you come up with the height. But now we use essentially like a laser rangefinder. Super easy. You shoot a couple of points on it and it does everything for you, and it tells you what the height is, and it's very accurate.
So we would call you and say, we have a suspected champion tree here. Could you come out and check it?
Oh yeah,
first?
the measurements that you put in on the website are just estimates. You don't even have to put them in. Like we'll come out and do that. So yeah, that's why there's a checked by DCR method on there. So when we come, that's the official. Whatever you put in is just, it helps us find the tree, because sometimes they're in little clusters or something. And so like, oh, we know it's the 80-foot pine over here, not the 60-foot. Like, just sort of helps us zero in on where it might be.
Okay. Okay, great. Great. Do we have any questions? Anybody raising their hand? Anybody putting questions in the chat? Let's see. Is there no curiosity here? Oh, Susan.
So I'm going to read a question in the chat in the order that they came in. I have to scroll up to it. So Sarah Mattis suggests, which I think is a very interesting idea, perhaps those interested could work with the Historical Society to search archives and our materials to create a collection of historic landscapes and trees in Lincoln. I think that'd be a wonderful collaboration.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Thank you, Sarah.
The historical societies have been great. We had a UMass student maybe 2 years ago who worked on our program for a semester or so, and she helped us get it into the sort of the virtual tour that you can take online. And she reached out to a lot of the historical societies, and they have answers to that. Like, oh yeah, this tree over here, and they have a picture of it, and this is the lady who planted it, and she was part of this family, and it's really great to get that rich history and sort of tie it all together. So you can see some of that, and I neglected to mention on these slides here, but there's some great arboretums around that also have virtual tours. If you can get out to the trees, that's great. But if not, so the UMass Arboretum in Amherst, terrific online website where you can virtually tour the trees. Many champion trees are out there. And also at Smith College, they have many of our champion trees planted long ago, rich diversity of trees, many different species, and really terrific online tours. Again, our mass.gov site doesn't allow us to do a lot. So my vision of having this interactive map where you can go through and find all the trees and see all the pictures, we're very limited and haven't been able to do that. But some of the academic partners have really good tours that you could take or that you could look at.
That sounds very cool. Thank you. Vicky, do you want to unmute yourself?
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for an interesting talk. Is there any hope that the state will protect somehow, healthy, mature trees on private land? You're doing quite a bit on public land, but what about private land, which is where most of the cutting happens at this point?
Yeah, well, again, we're a public agency, so we don't have jurisdiction on private land. So that would be a no. But local cities and towns, like the Wetlands Protection Act is a good example of where are there regulations that have that overlap? Where do you have jurisdiction? Like those are the questions. So yeah, mostly on our end, our questions come in about trees in the right of way along the streets. We try and connect people with their tree wardens. Our sort of our partnership group here in urban forestry is the Massachusetts Tree Wardens and Foresters Association. It's been around for over 100 years. A long time ago, Massachusetts decided they wanted to protect their trees, and they wrote in that they're going to have these tree wardens, and so they've been around, trying to regulate and provide protections to public trees and trees in the right of way.
Right. So how did these, let's say the wetlands protection happen so that it started protecting stuff that was in private land?
Because of the public impacts, like you're not going to have clean water if people are dumping oil into the town reservoir, So if you look at those sort of, public policies that provide protection for public health, clean drinking water, clean air, that's where you'll find those sort of avenues.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Nina, would you like to unmute?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Ryan. It's a wonderful presentation and inspiring. And our town in Weston, where I live, has a couple of champions from way back that need to be remeasured. So I will use the form to get you guys to come back and take a look. But my question is about protection in the form of just a simple visual barrier. I think there's one at, or several at the Arnold Arboretum that I've seen, maybe sort of a black rope and some black stakes. So it's not it doesn't take away from the visual beauty of the trunk, but it sort of keeps people from walking up close to the tree. And do you have any comments about such a small bit of protection, but in a public place where, all it takes is a few kids to climb it and jump on the branches, and we've seen that happening in a couple cases.
Yeah, whatever you can do to sort of give that tree its physical space. Like at UMass, some of their older, more, I don't know, fragile trees that they want to sort of keep people away from, they'll be fencing, usually a good amount of mulching, just creating a space for that tree. Again, that sort of protection zone to sort of keep people off the critical roots. Something is non-obstructive is, roping it off can help establish that as well.
Yeah.
It's
And in parking areas too, where people always try to find the shade, so they pull off in, community farms and places like that, they just don't realize how compaction happens over time.
Yes.
But also, what about labeling or signage? I saw in a couple of your slides, I saw some labels. Is that something you would recommend, and where would we go for that?
Oh yeah, there's all sorts of different types. What we use now is essentially like a little post, like a stake on the ground. Sometimes you'll see they screw it into the tree. They'll try and put like little springs behind it so that it keeps pushing the sign out, because you'll go and see this 100-year-old tree, and then it'll have a sign that's folded in half because the tree grew around it. So to get out there and readjust signs are important, or just don't nail it to the tree. Put it on a post or something on the ground and use that instead. Those have been fairly successful.
Mm-hmm. Well, that kind of, as state services would, that kind of recommendation would be great on your website. Such and such a town did this, and it was very, very helpful. If you have some of that posted on your website, that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you have a question from the chat.
I do, from Christine. It says, "Hi, Matt. I have so-called, quote, weed trees, unquote, like European spindle trees in my backyard next to taller trees like maple and oak. Should I take out the spindle trees to improve the soil for the older, taller trees, or for any reason I think they may be invasive?"
So yeah, that's a whole nother thing. It depends, I had written an article a while back about trees in Boston. I worked in Boston for a long time, and we talk with land trusts, city departments, and they put out tree removal guidelines, and a lot of times they'll say invasive trees, yeah, take them out, they're a problem. But in a backyard in downtown Boston, basically the only shade they have is coming from a Norway maple, So my caveat would be just there's a time and a place, and in the inner city and in Boston, where they didn't have a mature tree other than this one Norway maple that had seeded in, and my job is to come in and to do tree plantings for energy efficiency, to shade homes, to cool neighborhoods. Like, am I really going to take out a 2 foot DBH tree? So there's a bit of a balancing act. But I think as the further you go up Route 2, it becomes a little bit more self-evident that yes, you don't want invasives spreading, and you can manage it. We have inherited many cities of Norway maple. That was pretty much what they planted, and it's seeding readily and it's spreading. And now in our current decades, it's the invasive pear trees that they plant everywhere and that are spreading. So you want to manage that. It's an uphill battle. Knotweed is out of control. We've got stuff growing all over the place, and what it's doing is preventing the natural regeneration. So in that aspect, yes, you want to manage to allow for natural regeneration. You want to keep the invasives under control. But in some areas where we work, that's why I don't like to use blanket statements. In some areas where we work, that one tree, the tree that grows in Brooklyn was a tree of heaven. It was an Atlantis tree, and that was the one tree.
Right. Nancy Hazard, you want to unmute and ask a question?
Thank you. Yeah, and Matthew, thank you for talking about invasive trees. That's sort of a good segue to what I wanted to say. I'm very proud of a recommended tree list that Greenfield Tree Committee, excuse me, worked on maybe 10 years ago. And it's almost 100% native trees. And in the list, it not only talks about sunshade, wet, dry, blah, 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 all the things, but it also says how many different species of Lepidoptera, that's the moths and the butterflies, use that tree for their life cycle, and also how many bird species, or do bird species use it? And also, what about the mammals? What use it? So we've tried hard to get the iTree people to include that information in the benefits of trees, and have been unsuccessful to date. And if you have a personal contact with them, I had a hard time getting in touch with them recently. There was some people who retired, and so if you can help with that, let me know. And I'd also urge everyone who deals with planting trees in their community, just following on what you said, Matthew, is to plant the native species, because those are the species that support our ecosystems. And I'd also encourage you to, I'm happy to share what Green and Greenfield, what their list looks like. And I would love, worldwide, but statewide particularly, to see recommended trees identify, what the ecosystem, in addition to the sequestering carbon and helping with the rain and all that, and cleaning the air, all that other stuff, it's also just really important to support our biodiversity.
Yeah, absolutely. We plant lots of native trees. Yeah, I have seen that work. That's from Doug Tallamy's research and published books, which has been great to see, because it hadn't been addressed prior to, what is the actual food web? Who's living off of this plant? Like, people get worried, they see a plant in the landscape and it's got holes in it from a bug. It's like, you know that that's supposed to happen, right? Like, you can't get angry that life is living and propagating, because that's how it's supposed to work. So yes, not to use broad spectrum pesticides anytime you see a leaf with some holes in it. But yeah, when we meet with people, it's a dialogue. We ask them about what kind of tree they're looking for, where they want it, what are the reasons. We don't force trees on people, and then we explain right tree, right place. Like, all right, that might be what you're looking for, but we recommend this because you've got this, wet area, and this tree would do. But for whatever reasons, our foresters do recommend native species. We do plant in highly urban areas, so sometimes they won't survive. We've seen a lot of dieback on like sugar maples, a lot of salt issues. The change in climate does affect our native trees, and there's some work in using not non-native, but like a Kentucky coffee tree, or a tulip poplar, a sweet gum tree, some mid-Atlantic trees in our areas. But that's not to say just southern trees, because it's climate change. It means colder and hotter, so we really have to walk the middle line of trees that survive in our hardiness zone. But yeah, that's all very important things to take into account.
Thank you, Nancy. Susan.
I have another question in the chat from Gary. How do we preserve trees but also minimize power outages? And just for context, Matthew, as you may know, Eversource has been through Lincoln with a long list of trees to take down, and we had a public hearing. I see our tree warden is on this call, so if you have anything to add after Matthew answers, I know we'd love to hear from you. So how do we preserve trees but also minimize power outages?
Like we try and stress, we say right tree, right place. And it's really what it comes down to. They have a 30 under 30 that they recommend. Some of the species are right, some are a little weird, but essentially keeping the trees away from the power lines. If in your urban planning and management, in your zoning, are you undergrounding utilities? What are you doing to deal with a changing, increased windstorms? Are we doing more to protect the infrastructure? Do we want to keep the lights on? So trees need to be managed. There's no two ways about it. They grow. If anyone here is a gardener, that you're in the garden a lot. It's, if you're an arborist, if you're a tree person, you're managing trees a lot. So it's working essentially to have a good structure in place where you have active management. So we, again, work with all cities and towns, and some are fortunate enough that they have a good economy, they got a good tax base, they can invest in their public works department, or they have a good relationship with their utility company, and trees are pruned and maintained. Other places, they can only do reactionary pruning. They only have enough money to come out when there's a branch down or something's an issue, and they can't get ahead of the game. They can't get on a pruning cycle. So it's up to us, the state, with our limited resources, to make monies available to cities and towns to help them with their management.
So Matt, I have a question related to that. You have a 50/50 challenge grant fund, and are those challenge grants for capital improvements for adding new trees, or might there be any funding for that kind of preventive pruning of existing trees?
It's a little bit of both. I think we have about 6 categories. You'd have to pull up the fact sheet on it, but we do education and training, seed money if you want to help your staff. We do some focused tree plantings, focused stewardship or maintenance, helping you start up a tree board or committee. We want to get the ball rolling and set the stage for like ongoing excellent urban forestry.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sarah, you want to unmute yourself?
Do you want me to answer the question that Susan had?
Oh, yes, that would be great. This is Ken Bassett, our tree warden. Sorry, Sarah.
No, just regarding specifically the relationship of the town to the power companies and trees and power lines in conflict and so forth. I mean, as you know, we have the tree hearing process, which we went through on that 300 list of trees, and that process yielded compromises where the power company said, "Oh, to come down." We looked at it and said, "Really?" And we reached a compromise, and time will tell whether we were right or wrong. The other thing that historically with Chris Bebo, first of all, he as the kind of deputy tree warden, put together a process of permitting to the power company to do work in town. We've got to go back and get that revitalized with our new DPW director, but we had a fairly stringent set of rules as to how they were allowed to come in and start doing pruning. The other thing is that, of course, the power company has these magical boxes around the primary voltage line that they want to maintain. So many feet to the side, so many feet to the bottom, so many feet to the top, and they're really quite massive distances that they would like to hold. So, again, we push back on that and have tried to minimize destructive pruning. The other thing we do, as you know, is we on trees like the magnolias along Lincoln Road down near Codman, and the trees there next to the library, the catalpa and the European beech, we don't let the power companies prune those. We do that. We hire Jonathan Bransfield to do it, and we do it very carefully, as I hope you all recognize. So they're just a few footnotes on what we try to do when it comes to managing the relationship between power lines and trees. I will say, I mean, one of the things, like some of you know, that we've been planting the next generation of trees along the edge of Weston Road, knowing that the Norway maples that have gotten large and are beautiful, but they also just keep falling down, and they have taken out the power lines before, and one just came down a couple weeks ago. So sometimes we do face some hard decisions on whether a tree, really its time is up. We ought to consider getting it down before it does. Safety is a real safety issue. So anyway, those are my footnotes. I may not have answered the question, but just a few items. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I know I put you on the spot, and I appreciate your responding.
Thank you, Ken.
You're welcome.
So Sarah, do you want to unmute? Oh, you are unmuted.
I did.
What's your
Thank you.
question?
Thank you. One is a comment, and then it's a question, and maybe it's a question to Ken since he's here. Back in the dinosaur days, when I was a select, it was always battling with the power companies, and they had a way of gaming us, which was to come in and top trees rather than say they were going to take them down. So they avoided our scrutiny. And that wound up, and you'll notice them all along our roadways, these trees that look odd because they were just lopped off. They were not eliminated. And then they grow up and then they cut around, and make them go up and around the wires. But it's a bastardization of any kind of really good tree maintenance. My question is, has the town been successful in stopping that process? And then second is when I drive through other towns, I notice very, very different landscapes along the roadways and much more, maintenance clearly, and mature trees looking healthy and well cared for and pruned. Is that a function of budget, that we should just be increasing our budget to be able to preserve more and have a landscape that is really more protected? Those trees are more protected?
Is this a question
Yeah.
for
Yeah, well, I
For
don't know
Ken or-
if it's for Ken.
I guess, you see a massive amount of what I call yoking of trees, where the power company comes in and does the minimal amount of
Yeah.
slicing away at the tree, and then it gets this contorted
Yeah.
quality to it, which I don't find to be at all helpful to the idea of a beautiful roadway
Right.
landscape. And yet you do find that people get very upset with the idea that maybe the best thing to do is to just take the whole tree down rather than this bastardization of the tree. But that's a hard judgment call. Where I think there's an interesting area to explore is as you all know, the minor distance between the edge of pavement and stone walls is no place to plant a tree. Maybe in the horse and buggy days, Baker Bridge Road with a double row of sugar maples down in between the road edge and the stone wall was a great thing, but those days are gone. So I do think that some cooperation between landowners adjacent to roads to actually talk about planting the next generation of tree on private land, knowing that if it's on the other side of that stone wall, it has a chance of survival. And if we're committed as a town to helping take care of it, especially just getting it established, which is no easy thing. I mean, we have limits on how many DPW workers we have to get out there and do the watering of newly planted tree. But I think that's a future worth looking at, because I think that's where the greatest good can be reached in terms of historically beautiful scenic roads, which is kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I think, do we have more questions? I think we have time for one more.
I'll just jump in to comment on piggyback with Ken there. Yeah, so that some cities and towns are doing, that's called a setback tree program. So the tree warden, you can kind of get out there and talk with a homeowner. We tried to start doing it here, but essentially get the person to take the tree. Now, there's a whole bunch of different varieties. A lot of cities and towns are looking at this at different ways, and they're going about it in different ways. Some say, okay, we're going to put this tree, on your land. You take care of it. Some are going to say, well, we need a water and maintenance period. Some, I think, was Northampton, was saying, okay, we want to get this on the deed somewhere so that this tree, isn't taken out instantly, that you've agreed to put this tree on your land. But we want it to stay, and if you want it removed, you have to come back to the town to ask for that permission. Because when you're planting on private land, then essentially the tree becomes a private property owner. And I'll tell you what we see through some of the planting programs we've done is essentially when someone moves, when the house changes hands, trees are cut down, like almost always. And I don't know why that is. People move into a new house and they want to cut everything down, but that's a thing. So it's really unfortunate that when properties change hands, there's a huge loss of existing canopy. So maybe it's public awareness around that. Maybe it's working with your local realtors, giving them information on the benefits of trees, or maybe at the time of sale, it says, and by the way, keep your trees because they're worth this much. And we found this value in iTree, or this tree was from a city, the setback planting program, it should stay. But trying to promote tree protection and preservation around real till, the movement of property from one person to another. We've seen that there's a lot of tree loss around that.
Good to know. One last question, Susan?
I know we're almost out of time, but there's an important question from Trish O'Hagan, or comment. While those trees, these are the ones that are bastardized, to use Ken's word, while those trees may not be as attractive as they could be, it is older trees over 50 years old that absorb the most CO2. So we have a balancing, everything we do with trees is a balancing act. So there's a balancing act between the beautiful tree and the old tree that's doing a good job. So thank you for that question, that comment, Trish.
Thank you. And
I think that touches upon that point of growing the next generation of trees, like he was alluding to. It's a constant process. And with these larger planting programs, you've heard of probably million trees New York City, million trees LA, these really big numbers. What's going to happen? Those million trees are all going to grow up at the same age class. So 30, 40, 50 years from now, you're going to have a million mature trees. Massachusetts, we've done a different approach where we put in trees every year, and we kind of cycle through different neighborhoods, we cycle through different communities. So we're not really starting a burden that's going to hit all at the same time. You look back in the 1950s, a lot of tree planting, there was money available. That becomes an issue for cities and towns in the 80s and 90s. And now, and that's why you have these mature trees that are sort of falling apart. So to diversify not only species like we talked about, but to diversify age class of trees is also critical for long-term success.
that is fantastic information. Thank you. I think we've hit our time limit. It's 1:11 and we had until 1:15, and I have just a few more things to say. Thank you, Matt. This has been really, really great. I think you've given us a lot of information that we can take and now examine more what's happening on the DCR and mass.gov websites and see how some of those things might apply to Lincoln. And again, thanks to Bryn and to Ryan for co-sponsoring this on behalf of your organizations. And thank you to all for attending. You asked some really good questions and hope you're going away with some good information. So here's a reminder, this webinar has been recorded, and the link is going to be made available on the LLCT website, and it's going to take a few days for that link to get uploaded. So keep an eye out for notice from the LLCT on their website. And then once Bryn posts it, I will also post it on Lincoln Talk. It's ultimately going to be uploaded onto the public YouTube channel for the LLCT. So everybody, whether you've registered or not, will be able to access it. And then last of all, we invite your comments and any follow-up questions about this session or about our tree preservation study group in general at our email address. And that is, I'm going to share again and hope this goes up quickly. That email address is, oh, come on. That's priorities. Sorry. Our email address, I'll read it and then I'll wrestle with this thing, is lincolntreepsg@gmail.com. That's lincolntreepsg@gmail.com. And we are happy to know your thoughts. As we said, we're a very young group and we haven't even figured out how to incorporate new people in or how to proceed from here, but we are working it out as we go. And I'm trying, I got to get this thing off. Oh, great idea. Okay. I will put it in the chat and there we go. Can you see this? No.
Not yet. But I put the email in the chat and I can also share it with the recording.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
okay.
Here we go.
So I think that's it. I think we've all learned a lot, and on behalf of the Tree Preservation Study Group, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you all for coming.